Hey, welcome to the Raising the Standard Show. I'm Dr. Andrea Ramirez, and I have here with me my co-host Gideon Salazar, and we are excited that you've joined us today.
Yes, we're very excited. You know, we're talking today about supporting English learners, and we brought one of the experts in that, Elda Rojas. So I'm really excited. This is a very important topic for the Latino population.
Yeah, you know, if you're a cousin or a tio or a tia, and you've got a student in your proximity that the Lord has placed in your life to minister to who's learning English, I think that is for most of us. We have someone in our life who's learning English, who's a part of our family. Then we have this tremendous ministry opportunity, and we wanted to dive into what that looks like and what we can be doing on a very practical level to come along and to support English language learners, to co-journey with them, because it's no accident that they are in our family and that we are in their family. God has placed us specifically to help them as they're not just learning language, but that they're learning so many pieces, culture and content, and there's so much. So we love having Elda Rojas here. I want to share a little bit about Elda with you. She is a Harvard grad, and also I'm looking through she also has a master's in Texas at Texas State University, and she graduated with honors with both, and also has worked with English language learners for over 2 decades and has received recognition from the U.S. Department of Education for your work on the initiatives related to English language learners in particular. So we're just so blessed to have you here, and thank you. We love having you on set because you have such a wealth of information. But what I love and what I want to make sure you at home know is that Elda doesn't just have the theoretical knowledge, she has the practical knowledge. She is looking into the eyes of students who are learning English, or parents who are struggling to help their students know how to succeed. And so I love that. You have the education portion, you have the career experience, but you also have that practical knowledge of really getting down into the work and being able to work with people that are facing this issue. So thanks for being here. I wanted to talk about, I wanted to talk about terms, because we've discussed that before. Can you define what English language learners are called, and what people may hear like when they read letters or hear from teachers and counselors? How are they referred to?
Oh, very good question. Especially in the field of education, we have so many acronyms, right?
Yeah.
And so for reports, you'll see the acronym LEP, Limited English Proficient, and those usually go with reporting purposes. But you'll see ELL, English language learners, when it has to do with instruction. And so we prefer to use the ELL term overall. And it can refer to students in elementary school, secondary, and adults as well. You also hear like ESL, ENL, so English as a second language, or English as a new language. It depends on which state you live in. You'll see different terms being used.
Okay, and do those refer to the students themselves or to programs? Or how do you differentiate between what that terminology is for? Like I know you mentioned that ELP is for reports, but what about the others?
So LEP is for reports. ELP is English language proficiency. So you also will see ELP. Okay. And then for standards, you'll see ELPS, ELPS, right? And those are the standards of language acquisition. Okay. So yeah, there's so many different terms, but in general, when it comes to students, you'll see the ELL term mostly. In the West Coast, you may see the EL. They'll just say English learner.
So that's really important, I think, for parents to know when they're looking at reports about their children, to recognize some of these, because they may not know, oh, that's what they're referring to my child, if they're unfamiliar with these terms.
Yes, and don't be afraid to ask questions, is what I would say. Sometimes the terms, you know, if you come from a different state and you moved here, let's say to Texas, they may use a different acronym, and so it's okay to ask those questions.
Yeah, you know, I know that sometimes reports are a family affair, right? So you're like, what does this mean? There's this. So can you give them to us one more time? And just go through them one more time.
And so LEP, LEP, Limited English Proficient, is mostly used for reports. So state and federal reports will refer to language learners as LEP, Limited English Proficient. ELL, English Language Learner, is the term used for instructional reasons or purposes. So a learner, English learner in class.
Is that the one parents will mostly see, is the ELL?
They will. Okay. Yes, they will. And then the ESL is a program, or ENL. Some states call it the English for, it's a new language.
Okay.
So they're using the ENL instead of the ESL.
Right. Well, that's so helpful. I think that as parents and family members in general are trying to figure out what these reports are meaning, that helps to decode it for us. So we appreciate you going through those for us. You know, we have a new law. It's called the Every Student Succeeds Act, right? And we call it ESSA for short. And I know that you and I have visited a little bit about what ESSA is and as it gets rolled out. But what are some advantages that ESSA is going to bring for English language learners?
There are many advantages. I'll go ahead and share a few with you. One of them is the transparency piece and the reporting piece in regards to language proficiency. And so districts will be reporting in regards to the proficiency levels that students are acquiring, and they'll need to have intervention programs set up for students who have not progressed enough. And so if there are long-term LEP, the long-term English language learners, the districts will need to report on what are they doing, what kind of intervention programs and resources do they have available for the students. And then for students who exit the program, who actually achieve the proficiency level within, we really want within 4 years, the districts will need to report on what are they doing to follow up, to ensure that they continue to progress, because many times the students reach the proficiency level, but they're still struggling with the content, because as they have acquired the language, but the content is still quite challenging, especially if they don't have a background knowledge from their countries, and they've been exposed to new information. So they will still require additional supports.
So in those 4 years, what would deem proficient for students to be able to graduate from a program?
It's very important that students are placed appropriately, I will say.
Okay.
And so as they're placed appropriately in the correct level, so that they need to go through assessment for the proficiency level. And so they go into an ESL program. And what we want to see is a year's gain. So there's a report on, here in Texas we use what's called TELPAS. It's a Texas English Language Proficiency Analysis System. And students are assessed every year. And we want to see 1 year's progress minimum. We know that with language, it cannot be rushed. And sometimes we mistaken social language from cognitive academic language. Social language is acquired quite quickly. You know, it's a playground language. So within a few weeks to 6 months, and even to a maximum of 2 years, you hear them and they're playing with their counterparts, and you feel like, oh, they got it. They have the English. And yes, they do have the social English. But when it comes to the academics, that's where the challenge comes to play. And of the domains of language, listening and speaking, reading and writing, writing is the last domain to be fully developed. And where you can really tell how a student is doing is how they write.
How interesting.
So as a parent, I mean, because your child comes home and you hear him speaking English, he's on the phone or whatever, and you're like, oh, my child knows English. And so, but it's not transferring over maybe necessarily in the classroom. So how does a parent recognize it, identify it, and be able to say, no, my mijo, my mija is not where she needs to be?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Gideon, because at home, many times the students, the ELL students, are the heroes. They translate for the parents. They may not be able to answer questions with, different companies, the bills, etc. And the kids may be the ones doing that work, so they may feel like, Mijo does know English. I mean, he helps me at home. But then they see the report card and they're like, oh no, it doesn't look too good. And so parents need to keep an eye on that to see if they see their students struggling or not wanting to go to school or feeling discouraged when it's time to read at night or to complete the homework. And not be afraid of asking for help. There's always tutoring available. So for parents to go and talk to the teachers and say, there's some concerns. I noticed, my son's struggling with reading or with math, and to request for tutoring or some other type of assistance. They may have summer programs, acceleration programs. So it's very important to communicate with the schools.
Well, we were talking about how most viewers that are watching this show right now are probably proficient in English because we do our show in English, but we have family members who are not, who are in these programs, and so we were thinking about what could we do as the community of believers that have English language learners in our family, and maybe we're just a cousin, or maybe we're an aunt or an uncle or a nephew or a niece. What can family members do that help that student really excel and better understand what a year's progress looks like and how they can achieve that?
That's a very good question. Andrea, I know that in some states like California, 1 out of every 2 students is considered an ELL.
Wow.
And so you're going to have a relative that's an English language learner. And
Yeah,
here in
definitely.
Texas, we have 14% of our population are ELLs.
Yeah.
And so definitely the similar case.
Yeah.
And so when you have a family member, come up to bat. This is what I say, especially as the body of Christ. We have such a great opportunity within our faith-based communities, within our families, to help those around us, especially when it comes to the work, doing the work, to have on Saturdays a collaborative time where you can work on projects together. Or if your primo is struggling with words, help them by being an example, model for them how do you pronounce such words. Because let's say they're Spanish speakers. Well, Spanish is a very phonetic language. How it's written is how it's pronounced, right? I mean, it's that easy.
Yeah.
But with English, it's not the case. It's a language based on patterns. And so if they don't understand those patterns, they struggle to pronounce the words. And so they get discouraged when it comes to reading because they may not be able to advance as fast as their peers. And so for the primos, the primas, for them to step up, to bat and say, hey, let's go ahead and try this. Or you pronounce it this way, not that way.
Or be like a safe person to ask that question to, right? And I like your idea of having some intentional time as a family, like, hey, on Saturday afternoon or whenever you can get together to talk about language and the way to pronounce things. But you mentioned something that I find really fascinating, and I haven't heard it termed that way. So conversational English is called social language, right?
Yes.
But the academic language is called cognitive language, is that right?
Yes.
And the difference in those is, can you explain to us sort of what would be an indicator that that person is good at social language but maybe not as good in academic? I know you mentioned the writing, but what if you just have conversations with that person? How can you tell?
Very, very good point. Dr. Cummings uses the terms BICS and KELP. So BICS is the basic interpersonal communication skills, and the KELP is the cognitive academic language proficiency. And so think of it as an iceberg. And so you see the iceberg, the little piece on top of the water, but underneath is a real larger piece. And so that's the cognitive piece, and on top is the social piece, the social language. And so as the students acquire the social language, the cognitive takes much longer. And so what we can do to help them is to give them the supports. So they will need extra summer school activities, summer acceleration camps. I think there's a great opportunity for families to participate in the summer. And I know many times they say, well, we're going away to our home country in the summer. I would encourage families to stay and help the students attend those summer camps. And in the churches, if they have like vacation Bible schools, why not include a piece that has to do with language acceleration?
What a good idea. Yeah, so if you're in charge of